Thanks for staying with us on Consider This. I'm Melisa. Idris, with me, Sharaad, Kuttan. Now, earlier today at a side event at the United Nations, Dr Mahathir Mohamad slammed the UN and the Myanmar government for their inaction in resolving the Rohingya crisis. And Dr Mahathir said the UN's silence on the crisis has been deafening, and he called what happened in the Rakhine state genocide. So joining us on the line now to discuss the significance of these comments, we have Lilianne Fan, who is the chair of the Rohingya Working Group for the Asia-Pacific Refugee Rights Network. Thanks so much for joining us this evening, Lilianne. Now, I'd like to begin with asking your initial response. I mean, what did you make of the comments coming out of this event at the UN?
I thought that Dr Mahathir's comments were extremely strong and actually very appropriately so. We have seen very little moral leadership on this crisis in recent months. And I think it's actually really at the time for such strong calls to be made. And I was very pleased to see that the Prime Minister didn't shy away from using extremely strong language. This is language that has in fact it has been repeated by very credible organizations, including the UN fact-finding mission, which just about 10 days ago reminded the international community that Rohingya, who are still in Myanmar, are continuing to live under the threat of genocide. So this is not, a term that is completely unheard of, and I'm very pleased that the Prime Minister did not shy away from using it.
Now, we have a clip of the Prime Minister, when he made this assertion calling a spade a spade.
Let's play the clip.
Let us start by calling a spade a spade. What happened in the Rakhine state is genocide. What took place were mass killings, systematic rape, and other gross violations of human rights.
Lilianne, you spoke about the fact that expert groups have been weighing in on the question of what's happened in the Rakhine state and using the term genocide, or saying that communities are under the threat of genocide. But when the word is actually accepted, and this would be by other political powers, doesn't a whole process kick in? I mean, what happens when genocide is part of the consensus on the characterization of what's happened in Rakhine State and with the Rohingya people?
Well, I think that's exactly one of the problems, Sharaad. There isn't exactly what we would call consensus over what happened in Rakhine State and what is still happening towards the Rohingya. There are different terms that have been used. The fact-finding mission has been conducting, in fact, investigations. They can't actually go into Myanmar. They've been restricted from entering Myanmar, but they have been conducting interviews with many Rohingya and many experts around the region, including in Bangladesh, including here in Malaysia. And they found, last year, actually, in their report, they already found that there was genocidal intent in the violence that took place. And they also documented war crimes and crimes against humanity against other minority groups, including the Rakhine, including the Kuttan and others. So it's not only the Rohingya who are obviously facing discrimination and atrocities, but the genocidal intent of the nature of the violence that's taking place towards the Rohingya was a very strong characterization by the fact-finding mission. But that's not exactly accepted by all the member states of the UN. For example, this is an independent fact-finding mission. They do reports to the Human Rights Council. But then, that recognition of whether indeed a state would recognize the United States, for example, or any other member state of the UN, whether they recognize that as genocide is a separate question.
Lilianne, so Dr Mahathir also asserted that the Myanmar government has not been trying to resolve the crisis, whether in addressing the initial violence or in the issue of return to Rakhine. Now, would you say that these comments are accurate?
I think Dr Mahathir is really talking about the lack of action on the fundamental issues, and the fundamental issues would be those of granting citizenship to the Rohingya, which is the basic right that they are actually asking for. It's a restoration of citizenship. In fact, they're asking for. They had citizenship before the 1982 citizenship law basically rendered the group stateless. So that's one of the fundamental demands, and I think that Dr Mahathir and the other leaders in the Malaysian government are very well aware that return voluntarily to Myanmar will not happen unless the Rohingya do see some seriousness by the Myanmar government in addressing that fundamental issue. Secondly, there are other issues. There's issues of freedom of movement, even basic access to services like education and healthcare that is still very difficult in Rakhine State. There's no evidence, actually, that there's really been any improvement in Rakhine State, and in fact, things have gotten worse. There's now an armed conflict between the Rakhines, the Buddhist Rakhine, who are the majority in Rakhine State, against, with the Myanmar military. So things haven't actually improved. It doesn't mean Myanmar has been doing absolutely nothing. They have, built some infrastructure. They've tried to set up a process of repatriation, but actually it's not addressing the fundamental issues. It's very much focused on building infrastructure and looking at procedures, to facilitate return in a very administrative and bureaucratic sense, but it doesn't address the fundamental issues. So I do think that Prime Minister Dr Mahathir is correct on that issue.
Lilianne, I understand that Bangladesh, China and Myanmar have set up a tripartite joint working mechanism to evaluate the situation on the ground for the Rohingya repatriation. It signals China's role in any kind of solution. Does Malaysia have the diplomatic heft of a China to, in fact, develop a consensus on what is happening and push for action in a concrete sense and, pressure the Myanmar government into acting on all those areas that you just identified as lacking?
I think that we'll really need to see a coordinated diplomatic effort on this issue. You have China, basically, who does have influence on Myanmar, in Bangladesh too, to some extent, but Malaysia's respect in, the respect for Malaysia and Bangladesh is extremely high. I think that there's a lot of trust in Malaysian leadership's ability to speak out on fundamental issues from the Bangladeshi side. There's, of course, a lot of gratitude towards Malaysia for supporting, even on the ground, operationally, the humanitarian crisis through the Malaysian Field Hospital, which is managed by the Ministry of Defense. There's a lot of, awareness of the solidarity and a lot of gratefulness for that solidarity. So I do think that Malaysia does have an important role to play diplomatically, and it's quite a different role from China. China has been trying, I think, to find a solution to this issue, but not one that really addresses the fundamental issues. China's approach has been, let's get people to go back as soon as possible. They have really been pushing both Myanmar and Bangladesh to try to accelerate repatriation without actually looking at the fundamental conditions, and they haven't stressed the issue of voluntariness and safety and dignity for the Rohingya, which is something Malaysia is really stressing, which is in fact in line with international standards, and it's what the UN has been calling for as well.
Lilianne, the last question for you. You were in Cox's Bazar, I believe, where we have one of the largest refugee camps in the world. What's the sentiment on the ground among the Rohingya people? Are they getting increasingly desperate? Are they, as some people suggest, will become vulnerable to increased radicalization because of the desperate situation they're in? What's your sense of people on the ground? So Bangladesh now is hosting the world's largest refugee camp. As you said, that's Kuttan, and that's only one of several camps where the Rohingya are residing and seeking refuge currently in Cox's Bazar and Teknaf area in Bangladesh. I've been many times over the last 2 years, including with our foreign minister and with our deputy defense minister. And I would say the situation on the ground now is there's a lot of uncertainty. I think that just a few months ago, things looked a little bit more positive because what the Rohingya in the camp really want is, they do want to go back. It's not that they want to stay in Bangladesh. They do want to return to Myanmar. Myanmar is their home. They feel very strongly that they belong in Myanmar, but they do want to go back with guarantees of security. They want to go back with consultation. They want more dialogue. They've really been calling for dialogue. And in fact, they were very hopeful when there was a delegation from Myanmar accompanied by some ASEAN officials that did visit them in July, and they were hoping that would continue. But instead what happened is, yet another attempt at repatriation, which was extremely rushed, with no real preparation. And what the Rohingya have actually been calling for is renewed dialogue, and something that could be mediated, in fact, by ASEAN. So I think there is a role for ASEAN, but it needs to be one that stops trying to push for repatriation at a time when that's just not possible, and actually focuses on building trust. It is true that there's a lot of vulnerability in the camps. I would say it's not just radicalization, but it's things like trafficking. There's a lot of there's lack of work, of course. There's a very high
unemployment rate and this idleness, of course, is always a very dangerous mix, particularly in a place that is on a border where there's already a lot of transnational crime taking place. So I think that there's vulnerability of Rohingya getting caught up in networks that already exist, whether it's drugs, whether it's human trafficking. And I do think, we can't ignore the violence that is lurking, and there's potential in the camp. I think that the youth in the camp are a huge, they have huge potential, and really what they're calling for is education. They are really insisting that they do not want to lose their future. They want education, and the biggest investment that we could possibly make for the Rohingya right now is to try to make that happen for education.
Lilianne, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your experiences there with us. We're going to come back and look at other issues locally right here on Consider This. Stay tuned.